Wake and Bleed is a companion story running parallel to the events of The Drunken Contract, offering a deeper dive into its dark, chaotic world. Set in the same universe, Wake and Bleed unfolds alongside The Drunken Contract.
Rise and fall. I suppose this is where I'll meet my fate, Tharklak, at the very end of destiny's fraying threads. How cruelly ironic, isn't it, that all paths should lead to this most desolate conclusion? Maybe I owe an explanation. You see, I wasn't running from life, no, I was running from men. And yet, I'll admit I might have deserved this doom. I was caught where I shouldn't have been, with the wife of the Lord, no less. But let's not get tangled in the details. It's not like they're innocent either. So I ran into the cursed heart of Foland Forest, and they, with their superstitions, warn against such a flight. Never go there under the cover of night, they say. But what choice did I have, poor fool that I am? And fate was unkind. I ran straight into the embrace of a Malphasis. The moon hung heavy above, twin orbs of soul casting a pale light over everything. You never think such horrors will happen to you, but, alas, it's not like the warnings hadn't been clear. If your mind is stronger than the spirit's madness, they say, you'll earn its gift. A gift, they call it, as if some treasure awaits. Ha! To hell with that. To hell with me. To hell with this cursed forest. My will, it's a withered thing, as barren as the deepest desert wells. Yet, here I am. The Malphasis. Gods, what a sight it was. Foul doesn't even begin to describe the horror it brought. Its form, broken and twisted, so mangled it defied all attempts to understand it. And then, those eyes. I'll never forget them. Fucking elven eyes, or they used to be, though what sickening mockery they'd become. That's when I realized this wasn't just a spirit, if such things can be called just. No, this thing was wrong, deeply wrong. It seemed like it had crawled out of some forgotten pit, a place so vile even the gods had abandoned it. And then it looked at me. I say looked, but it wasn't just a look, it was a pull, a suffocating force that dragged my soul toward its depths. Tharklak, I beg you, let this thread of fate be short. Let it snap quickly, because deep in my bones I know I won't make it out of this night. I felt it, the spirit's grasp, tightening around me as my last scream tore through the air. My body fought, but there was no escape. The dark claimed me, cold and merciless. And then, silence. When I woke, I was in a prison cell. The stone walls were damp, heavy with the scent of rot, and the air was thick with a musty stench of mildew. The cell itself was small, barely big enough to stretch my limbs. A rusted iron door barred my exit, its edges chipped and worn, hanging on squeaky hinges. Beyond that, there was nothing but a small, barred window high above, just wide enough for a sliver of moonlight to creep through. The floor beneath me was cold stone, cracked in places, its surface slick with the moisture from the damp walls. I pushed myself to my feet, shaking with the effort, but before I could stand fully, a rough hand shot out, grabbing me by the arm and jerking me back down. One of the guards. He was a brutish man, thick-necked and grim. His filthy uniform reeked of sweat and blood, and his boots were worn from endless tread across the prison's stone floors. He shoved me back to the ground, laughing cruelly, as another guard stepped in, his co-worker. They took turns with me for weeks, beating me, mocking me. It was the same every day, every hour, and the pain, it never stopped. I thought back to why I was here. The Lord's wife, of course. I'd thought myself a dead man for that, and for good reason. What else could have brought me here to this wretched place? But as the days passed in this hellish pit, a terrible thought began to gnaw at me. This wasn't the same city. These weren't the same people. This wasn't even the same Lord. I couldn't escape it. Something didn't add up. Then one day, a man entered the prison, dressed like some kind of lawyer, followed by a preacher. His clothes were fine, trimmed in gold, and his every step seemed deliberate, as if he had somewhere important to be. The preacher was draped in robes of black, his face pale, and his eyes distant, as though he were already somewhere else. They approached my cell, and as they drew nearer, my heart sank to the bottom of my chest. I knew this feeling. I recognized it. This was the sin of a dead man. They were here for me. But no, it couldn't be. It was just some bumfuck lord from nowhere. Could they really be here to kill me? My mind raced, desperate for any answer. The lawyer reached my cell first, his gaze cold and indifferent. He glanced at the papers in his hand before looking me dead in the eye.
You, Gor of Thain,
He began, his voice like ice.
are found guilty of mass murder. Your sentence is death. The preacher is here to grant you mercy, though you will find none here. Beg the gods, for they are the only ones who may save you now.
My breath caught in my throat. Mass murder. No, I hadn't done this. What was this madness? My body went cold as I realized. The life I had known was slipping away, and all that remained was a future I could not escape. The lawyer turned and walked away, his boots echoing down the corridor as the preacher lingered in front of my cell. His gaze was soft, almost sympathetic, but there was a coldness to it too. He leaned closer, as if expecting me to speak, his voice low when he finally asked,
What is your prayer?
Normally, a preacher would ask for a confession, to hear about one's sins against the gods. But he didn't. He simply wanted my prayer. I looked at him, the words barely a whisper, my voice ragged from the days of torment. My only sin is being weak-willed. As for when the Malphasis took me, the words trailed off as flashes of images flooded my mind, blood, screams, and faces of those I had destroyed, all of it crashing into me like waves of agony. A sharp pain twisted through my chest, and tears welled in my eyes. I looked at him, and the words finally broke free, ragged and frantic. I am possessed by an evil spirit. As I spoke, the flashbacks continued, scenes of blood and destruction, my hands stained, my body moving as if not my own. What could I offer in prayer? What was left to give when all I could see were the faces of the dead? I choked on a sob, wishing the end would come soon. The preacher's eyes widened, a flicker of fear passing over his face. He stammered,
By a spirit, you say? What kind?
I looked at him, and the words came more easily now, though they felt like a death sentence. An elven one. The preacher's face drained of color, turning white as a sheet. He stumbled backward in shock, slipping on the damp floor, then quickly scrambled to his feet, his panic clear as he turned and fled, disappearing down the hall. Well, I suppose my fate is sealed now. No one will come for me. No mercy, no salvation. Only the dark and the ending that waits for me. Not long after, I heard voices down the corridor, muffled at first, then clearer as they drew closer. The clinking of boots on stone followed, a slow, deliberate rhythm, like death taking its time. And then, like a calm ghost slipping through the shadows, a man appeared. He was cloaked, a hood pulled low over his face, but he walked with an unsettlingly serene presence. He stopped in front of my cell, his posture casual yet deliberate, as if this moment were routine. He tilted his head slightly, and as he stared at me, he muttered under his breath,
Yeah. Shit. It's another one. I hope this one is him.
I squinted at him through the dim light. His skin caught my eye first, smooth and flawless, like polished ivory. Too perfect. Then his eyes, piercing blue with cat-like slits. My stomach churned. Shit, I muttered. It's a fucking elf. I glared at him, my disdain clear. What the fuck is a bitch-ass fucking elf doing here? What are you sightseeing? Do I look good to you, shiny-ass elf? Fuck off. The elf slowly pushed back his hood, revealing the signature pointed ears that made my blood boil. He smirked, that smug, holier-than-thou look every elf seemed born with. Gods, I hated them. They walked around like they were divine gifts to the world, perfect and untouchable.
My name is Alar Ferindral,
He said smoothly, his voice carrying that lilting tone I despised.
I was told you had a run-in with a Malphasis. Where did you encounter it?
I glared harder, my jaw clenching. Go fuck yourself. Alar sighed, almost bored, and waved his hand in a complex gesture. Before I could react, my body froze, locked in place as if my limbs were suddenly stone. What the fuck did you just do to me? I snapped, my voice laced with fury. He smirked.
Yep, that'll shut you up, you foul-mouthed little fuckboy.
Fuck you, you piece of shit, I spat through clenched teeth. Alar's eyes glinted with amusement.
Silence.
He commanded, and with another spell my voice vanished. Panic gripped me as I tried to shout, but not a sound came out. He cast yet another spell, and the iron gate to my cell creaked open without him even touching it. Damn elves and their magic. He stepped closer, his movements calculated, and pointed the glowing tip of his staff at my eyes. The light was blinding, forcing me to squint as he stared deep into me, as if reading the secrets carved into my soul.
So,
Alar said, his tone taunting.
Are you just going to hide in there waiting for them to take your head? We can talk, of course.
A grin slowly spread across my face, one that wasn't entirely my own. My lips curled, and the words spilled out, though they didn't feel like mine.
Ah, Ilar Ferindral?
I purred.
Well, it's been a long time. I didn't think it'd be you. Go on then, let me out. I need to take back my throne. Ha ha ha. I found it, you know, it's real. That bastard king of the first house of Lutherian sent a spy into my party. He stabbed me, can you believe it? Ha ha ha.
I laughed again, my voice dripping with deranged glee.
But I gutted him, from hair to nail, ha ha ha. You know how it is, Alar. Humans can't outwill an elf, can they?
Alar's smirk deepened, his sharp features catching the light.
I finally found you,
He said, his voice filled with dark satisfaction. The grin on his face stretched wider, sharp as a blade. The voice inside me, deep and resonant, spoke with a commanding edge that made my skin crawl.
Come on, we need to get out of here.
Before I could react, Alar tilted his head, that damn smirk still etched across his face.
Not quite yet.
He replied, his tone almost casual.
You didn't tell me your name.
There was a pause, a heavy silence, as if the thing inside me was weighing its options. Then it answered, its voice no longer strained by my throat, but ringing clear, sharp, and alien.
It's me, Vaeldaros.
It said, the name dripping with venom and arrogance. The elf's blue eyes flickered with recognition, his calm demeanor momentarily disrupted.
Vaeldaros, you say?
Alar mused. Then his tone grew sharper.
You claim to be in control, yet the human is still here. Why is that?
The Malphasis inside me faltered, its voice stuttering with disbelief.
What? That can't be. No way a shit like him could wait. No, I became a Malphasis? No. You need to kill me, Alar. I cannot allow a dirty human to inherit the elven gifts. My elven gift.
Alar let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head.
Well,
He said smoothly.
there's not much I can do about that. My hands are tied, you see. I was sent here to tie up loose ends. The Sixth House doesn't want that throne you found to ever see the light of day.
He shrugged, feigning nonchalance.
But you won't need to worry about that. Humans fear what they don't understand. Let the human win, Vaeldaros, and they'll grant you your wish for you.
The Malphasis paused, considering his words. Then, with a reluctant growl, it agreed.
Fine. So long as you swear this. If the humans don't kill him, you will.
Alar inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable. He bowed and began reciting a prayer in elven, his voice flowing like water over polished stones.
Hail varian thras ilkirados tal, ultherin quelserandos law. May the light of the stars guide your torment. Let your soul find its fate in silence.
The air shimmered faintly as he finished, and Alar straightened, brushing invisible dust from his cloak. He cast a spell, and the cell door groaned as it swung shut and locked itself with a resounding click. Turning back to me, Alar's expression softened, just slightly.
Human,
He said quietly.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. Your body is returned to you now.
With a wave of his hand, the paralysis holding me broke, and my voice returned. I gasped, falling to my knees, my limbs shaky and weak.
Enjoy the gifts while you can.
Alar added, his tone distant.
I'll inform the judge that it wasn't you, but him. I can't promise it'll change their minds, but it's the least I can do.
With that, he turned and walked out of the cell block, the sound of his boots fading into the dark corridor. There was a strange weight to his steps, like he carried the burden of something he couldn't name. I slumped against the wall, my head swimming. I didn't know what the fuck had just happened. My body still tingled with residual energy, and I could feel something foreign pulsing deep inside me. My head dropped into my hands. Shit, I muttered. I'm still going to die, aren't I? Even if they let me go, I slept with the Lord's wife. They'll find me. They'll end me. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the silence. Fuck. What do I do now? What can I do? The answer, as always, was silence. I thought frantically, pacing the cell in my mind even as my body refused to move. There's gotta be a way out of this shit, I told myself. I've gotten out of tighter spots than this. But the harder I thought, the more hopeless it seemed. Shit! Shit! Then, all of a sudden, a wave of exhaustion hit me. It wasn't the gradual kind that creeps up on you. No, this was like being slammed into a wall. My body felt heavy, my eyelids drooping despite my best efforts. I fought it, tried to stay alert, but it was no use. Silence claimed me, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Time became meaningless. Days, maybe weeks passed. I couldn't tell. I only woke long enough to choke down food and water before slipping back into the void. But then one day something changed. I woke up feeling good. Too good. My body buzzed with energy, like I could take on the world and win. It was strange, surreal even, but my relief was short-lived. My eyes caught a reflection in the grimy surface of my water bowl, and my heart stopped. No. No, no, no. I stumbled to my feet, staring at the distorted image. My hands shot up to my face, feeling the unfamiliar contours. My ears, they were pointed, sleek. No! Fuck me, no! I screamed, stumbling back into the corner of the cell. My voice was ragged, my breath shallow. I'm a fucking elf. What the fuck is this shit? This can't be real. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Maybe it was a blessing I was going to die because I couldn't be seen like this. Not as one of them. Before I could spiral further into despair, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Heavy boots, 3 pairs. My gut twisted. That's the sound of death, I thought grimly. The 3 figures came into view, their presence commanding. The preacher was there, his face a mask of solemnity. Beside him was a knight clad in gleaming armor, his expression cold and unreadable. But the 3rd figure, my heart sank further. It was a prince. He carried himself with an air of authority, his richly adorned cloak sweeping the floor. His face was young but hardened, the weight of power etched into his features.
Put the collar on him,
The prince commanded, his voice sharp and precise.
so he can't use his magic.
The knight, who looked every bit the hardened warrior, nodded.
Yes, Your Highness.
Without hesitation, the knight stepped into my cell and snapped a cold, metal collar around my neck. It bit into my skin, heavy and unforgiving. I hissed at the sharp discomfort. "Shit, that hurts," I muttered under my breath, glaring at him. The prince gestured again.
Cuff him. Chain him. We'll take him with us.
The knight obeyed, slapping iron cuffs on my wrists and securing them with thick chains. He handled me with no care, like I was a sack of grain. As they pulled me to my feet, I could feel the weight of my situation pressing down on me. So this is it, I thought bitterly. Time to take the long walk to my end. The walk down the hall was suffocatingly silent. None of us spoke, the only sounds being the rhythmic clinking of my chains and the heavy footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The air was thick with tension, each step feeling like a march to my execution. At the end of the hall, the prince finally broke the silence. Turning slightly, he called the knight by his name, Sir Cale, and gestured to the right. As the prince began to turn down the indicated corridor, the preacher stepped forward, his brows furrowed in confusion.
Your Highness,
He interjected cautiously.
the gallows are to the left, just outside those doors.
He gestured to the opposite direction with a trembling hand. The prince stopped, turning his gaze to the preacher. His voice was calm but sharp.
I know.
The preacher blinked, visibly unsettled.
But Your Highness,
The prince cut him off, his tone steelier now.
But what?
The preacher flinched, swallowing his words, and lowered his head.
nothing, Your Highness.
He mumbled. Satisfied, the prince resumed his pace, leading us toward another set of heavy wooden doors. As we approached, a figure came into view, a female elf standing poised and alert by the door. Of course, I thought bitterly. Another fucking elf. She was tall and regal, her silver hair braided intricately, her emerald green eyes betraying nothing. Her stance was one of authority, and her armor, though lighter and more refined than the knight's, gleamed with the same unforgiving precision. The prince addressed her by name, Linstra, and gave her a curt nod.
Good. I see you've made it on time.
Linstra inclined her head slightly, her expression impassive.
Your Highness,
She replied, her voice carrying the lilting accent of her people. The prince turned to the preacher, who stood frozen in place.
You will wait here.
The prince ordered, his tone brooking no argument.
Is that understood?
The preacher nodded, his lips pressed tightly together as he stepped back to the wall, clasping his hands nervously. The knight, Kyle, gripped my arm roughly, steering me into the room. I stumbled but managed to stay upright as he pulled me toward a sturdy wooden chair, bolted to the floor. He chained me to it with methodical efficiency, the iron biting into my wrists and ankles. Across the table from me sat another chair, simple but clearly meant for someone of importance. The prince crossed the room and sat down with the weight of authority, his piercing eyes locking onto mine. Linstra followed, standing behind him like a shadow, her expression unreadable as she folded her arms across her chest. The door shut with a heavy thud, and the room fell silent once more, save for the faint clinking of my chains as I shifted uncomfortably. Whatever was about to happen, I could feel it in my bones. It wouldn't be pleasant. The prince leaned forward, his piercing gaze boring into me like a predator sizing up its prey.
So you're Gor of Thain, the infamous charlatan.
He began, his voice smooth but dripping with disdain.
You've spent your life tricking good people out of their money, living off their misery.
Before I could respond, Sir Cale, his ever-loyal knight, stepped forward and drove his fist into my gut. The air shot out of my lungs, but I managed to rasp, "Fuck you, like you know me, you pompous piece of shit. You and your kind can rot in the ground for all I care." Kyle didn't take kindly to that and followed up with a sharp punch to my face, splitting my lip. I spat blood onto the floor and glared back at him, defiant. The prince smirked, leaning back in his chair as though amused by my resistance.
You got caught fucking Sophia, Lord Baron's wife. A bold move, even for a scoundrel like you.
Kyle hit me again, this time harder, and I felt the metallic taste of blood pooling in my mouth. I clenched my teeth, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a response. The prince tilted his head, studying me like a specimen under a lens.
So, Gor,
He said slowly.
why shouldn't I kill you where you sit?
I said nothing, holding his gaze with quiet defiance. Kale growled and drove another punch into my face.
Answer the prince.
He barked, but I stayed silent. They wanted me to beg, to grovel like a dog. I wasn't going to give them that. Let them play their little games, I thought. The rich always do, treating the rest of us like toys for their amusement. Then the elf, Linestra, as the prince had called her, spoke up in her melodic, condescending tone, this time in her native tongue.
You know what will happen, don't you?
I smirked, responding in fluent elven. Do you know what he'll do when he finds out you're pregnant with his child, or should I tell him myself? Her eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before she quickly masked her shock. I leaned forward, sniffing theatrically. I can smell it, I said, laughing darkly. Ha, 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 ha. Linestra went pale, retreating into silence. The prince looked at her sharply.
What did he say?
Nothing.
She said quickly, her voice tight.
Just an empty threat.
I smirked, blood still dripping from my mouth.
If you're not going to talk,
The prince said coldly.
then we'll take you to the gallows.
Finally I spoke, my voice steady and mocking. I'll be smiling from the other side, knowing that in time your gods will return and turn you all into nothing but their puppets. The prince froze, his eyes narrowing.
How do you know that?
I let my smirk grow wider. Because Vale Daros was the Malphasis, I said. And did you know Linestra's is from the 4th house? Before I could continue, Linestra snapped.
Shut up, you charlatan.
Oh, did I hurt your feelings? I sneered, laughing again. The prince ignored her, focusing on me. I don't care about her. Tell me about the gods. I leaned back as much as the chains would allow, savoring the moment. In 40 years, I said, the gods will return, but not as saviors. No, they'll come back to reign over you. Nothing will stop them. Not you, not your armies, nothing. You'll be dead by then anyway, but she... I nodded toward Linestra. Oh, she'll be around, and she'll know exactly what's coming. Poor elf, bearing the weight of her kind's failures. The prince's expression darkened.
How did Valdaros?
6th house, I interrupted, cutting him off. He knew. She knows what they do, and she won't even tell you. The prince turned to Linestra, his disappointment clear.
Is that true?
She said nothing, her lips pressed into a tight line. The prince turned back to me, his voice low and calculating.
I don't care about your delusions. What I want to know is simple. What did the elf who spoke to you want? Tell me, and I might just let you go.
I laughed bitterly. Like I could trust the likes of you. He placed a document on the table, sliding it toward me.
This guarantees your freedom from all charges. Up to this point, all of them.
That gave me pause. All charges? I mulled it over, realizing this might be my only shot. Fine, I said finally. Veldaros found Thrin's throne. It's a place built by the race that even the gods feared, a place that held knowledge that could bring them to their knees. He thought he could claim it for himself, but an elf in his party killed him before he could. But he shared its location with me before he died. He wanted me to find it so we could fight back before the gods returned. I leaned forward, smirking at Linestra. So, is that good enough? Not like you'd believe me anyway. Linstra studied me for a moment before turning to the prince.
He's telling the truth.
She said quietly. To be continued. Until next time, if you like it, please subscribe for the next episode.